Like I'm able to see caste not only in Lehaf, but also in Harry Potter, but also in, Hunger Games, but also in Avatar, the Airbender, and so on. So
And in
like
Bollywood movies,
all the
closer with
time, like,
all the time.
I love Karan Johar because like the thing is that Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum is so iconic because Karan Johar is a master of creating these upper caste utopias,
Correct. Yeah.
And one might say, oh, there is no Dalit character, and that film is not about caste. But by
Right.
not being about caste, it is completely about caste
Wow.
because it's showing that upper caste people can exist in
In
this
this
utopia
bubble, yeah.
loud, and upper caste people can also constantly move, like their fantasy moves. They can be in Chandni Chowk, but think that their feudal haveli in Chandni Chowk
Switzerland. Yeah.
some England ka,
Yes.
castle and so on.
Yeah.
So that level they are dissociating on. It's
Right.
not even like disassociation on a normal level. It's on
Right.
an
On a
unbelievable level.
hyper, yeah.
And you need a dissociation when you sustain this kind of an inhuman world and society. You have to, when you can't look at what is, you have to look away and build something which distracts you. And so I love it. I love Karan Johar as a filmmaker.
Wow. Interesting. So, hola, hello, and welcome to yet another contentious episode of The Queer Podcast Season 2, where we're exploring a very unfortunate, pervasive phenomena, which is the intersection of caste with sexuality, particularly with like a focused lens on our own Indian problematic system. So, unfortunately, we have this omnipresent caste system that continues to touch on every stratum of society. And this is very often overlooked and passed by those with power, especially, even within our own disenfranchised queer community. So recently at Mumbai Pride, as some of you might have heard, seen, read, there was an unfortunate incident that occurred where four participants held up images of Baba Sahib, Dr. Ambedkar, and were chanting Jai Bhim slogans. They were stopped by the organizers, which led to a barrage of social media outrage. There were apologies that were given by the organizers, and there was a lot of discussion that was brought to the table. And to help us unpack all these issues and to help me with my ignorance, we have the extremely accomplished Aroh Akunth, who identifies as a Dalit trans feminine writer performer, who's also the curator and founder of the Dalit Queer Project and the Dalit Art Archive. Hi, Aroh. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Germany.
Thanks for having me, Ashish.
So, Aru, before we go on, would you tell me how you'd like me to refer to you, what your pronouns are?
It's either she, her, or they, them. They them is more to relax people into the she, her,
Okay,
but that's what it is. Yeah.
right. Okay, no, done. I'm just learning that I need to ask that at every stage rather than presume it, right? Okay, so now I have to give you a big disclaimer. As an ancient, privileged, Savarna, cis gay man, right, there's a lot of ignorance. So probably will be prone to saying stuff which you will find politically really incorrect. But the whole purpose and the whole maksad of the podcast is for you to educate me, to set me correct, and to help me learn, the new changing like queer spaces, as well as all the issues around language, gender, and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So please understand that these are transgressions that are inadvertent and they come from ignorance and they do not come from any intent whatsoever. But please, at every stage, stop me and say, don't say that, uncle.
Yeah.
Please say this, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I understand to start off with, I understood the moment I was thinking about subjects to speak about was that the fact that I don't even know or I don't even question caste is just clearly a reflection of my caste privilege. As problematic as language can be, I know that a lot of listeners probably wouldn't even know, and this is going to be shocking for you, wouldn't even know the differences between the terms Savarna, Bahujan, Dalit, Avarna. I wasn't aware. So, is there any way that you can just give us a simple, not a 101, but a simple introduction to the terminology?
Yeah, like Savarnas are privileged in the sense of that they are touchable and that they are coming within the Varna fold.
Okay.
And the Dalits and Adivasis, or the indigenous people in India, are not falling within the Varna fold. So they are considered outside the Varna fold.
Okay. And the Varna fold is that thing which we were all taught in most Indian
The four
schools.
Varnas, the Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. And a very common misconception is that people conflate Shudra and Dalits, but Shudra and Dalits are different.
Oh.
Um, yeah.
So even
So
beyond that and absolutely invisibilized and outside even the four, which were anyway shocking enough to
yes,
learn as a child, lies the Dalit
the fifth. And
Adivasi.
actually, Dalits are also called Pancham. That's why they're also called Pancham,
Okay.
like the fifth people and so
Right.
on. Yeah.
And Avarnas?
Avarnas can be both Dalit and indigenous people,
Okay.
and somebody who lies outside the Varna fold. Now, the thing is that this kind of classification is very rudimentary, that, that there are four Varnas and there's a fifth Varna. And because caste systems are changing, like, from one region to another, from one ethnicity to
Correct.
another.
Correct.
And so there can be more nuances there. There can be other positionalities that can lay claim to being Avarna and say that, see, historically we were nomadic and so on. So,
Correct.
what I want to say is that we can say what identity is what for the purpose of sociological understanding,
Yes.
because all these identities are also facing public debates and have gone through colonial processes and other processes of standardization through state and so on.
Wow, okay, that's interesting that you bring that up. 'Cause yes, of course, the whole colonizing experiences by the British, by the Dutch.
But when I say colonizing, it's not only the British and the Dutch, it's also the colonization of the Dalits by the upper castes.
Right.
Because at some point, these communities were made to submit and were made to, go into this kind of like enclosed classes where you are forced to do one occupation generation after generation after generation. And actually, the history of colonization of caste is very well documented and is way older than the European colonization, which we are taught and made to understand.
So we establish a very clear correlation then between the marginalization of the Dalits along with our own queer community, which is also, of course, hugely marginalized. And I read somewhere that you refer to the confluence of Dalit and queerness to be an uneasy marriage. So why do you say this?
I see that a lot of production which happens around queerness and where queerness is produced is a lot of times delinked with the philosophy of queerness.
Right.
And the philosophy of queerness is that wherever there is going to be friction with the society, wherever there's going to be a distance with the society, we are going to overturn it and organize around it and use it to our benefit, so that what society called, like, queer means weird literally. So, like, whatever society would say called weird or disabled or
Strange, or
crazy,
yeah.
we will make it happen because we are living, and that is the queer pedagogy. Unfortunately, this dream of, like, in the context where I said this dream of that I can move forward because I will learn to repair whatever wound that the society has given me and imagine something else, is a bit more difficult to do for Dalit queer people specifically, because the wound is unlikely to close. You don't understand the wound, you don't understand the history of wound and so on. So it's so much more difficult. You have to, in a way of self-respect, you have to get your past acknowledged. And queerness is all about building something afresh. So there is a tension there.
Ah.
Sometimes it goes together, sometimes it helps you understand both of them.
Yes.
Sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
And that's the context in which I said that quote.
Right. But you do agree with this basic, like a reductive, simplistic thing that, the queer movement does need to include a hell of a lot more. Aside from, in some ways, we're resubscribing to the binary, we're resubscribing to the norm by wanting those things, right?
Yeah, and also they need to subscribe to a hell lot of more
Yeah.
for queerness, because queerness is cutting across axes.
Correct.
You might say that, oh, there's not a queer person who requires caste caste policy at the workplace, but of course there is.
Of course.
And you might say there's not a queer person who's single who would want to adopt, but of course there is. And similarly, there are so many queer people, like, as this is something which I will always talk to older queer activists. And like as a younger person, I was always, scared of that I would never end up having partners and so on.
Right.
And a lot of them lived a lot of their life without like long partnerships also. Some of them did find partners.
True.
And the ones who lived life without partners also lived full, complete lives. This is a
Yes.
kind of thing that queer lives are constantly subjected to, that, you are going to be alone
Yeah.
and you're not going to have somebody to hold on to. But of course, we do have people to hold on to, and that's why we are here.
Okay, that's actually good because it leads to what I wanted to ask you next was there's a lot of stuff online about how even notions of attractiveness in India and desirability are actually in, especially in the queer dating context, are very loaded actually. So Dhiren Borisa, who I'm sure is a familiar name for you, writes that caste is used when we decide our markers of beauty, creating a logic of desirability even in queerness. So Borisa goes on to elaborate about notions of respectability politics, how this is a substitute in some ways for caste markings, right? Or markers. The neighborhood you grew up in, the color of your skin, the clothes that you wear, how fluent you are in English, and very pointedly, your surname, right? So, again, caste privilege, I can't make out between a high caste and a low caste surname, to be really honest, right? They don't mean different things to me, right? Which is my privilege, right? But Burisa points to the way that caste functions, for example, on Grinder. In North India, there's lots of profiles where they will clearly say Jat boy, Rajput prince. I mean, not that they're a prince, but they're picking up on that whole notion of whatever, or Gujar. So there are no profiles, apparently, or very few maybe, that identify with lower caste communities.
The thing is that we are all existing within the same system, but the weight that is of that system, the violence of that system is different on us. And I would say that yes, possibly there could be a Dalit profile on Grinder,
Yes.
but will it demand the same kind of desirability? What would be the skewed politics and power of that desirability? And unfortunately, the queers know it really well that bottom shaming is a thing,
Yes.
um, that dominating also puts you in a certain kind of role, which of course people are trying to break out of. And people, of course, I know some of the fiercest people in my life are bottoms, and they are able to
Power
completely
bottoms.
renegotiate what it means. Yeah, renegotiate what it means to be a bottom and to be like make it political.
But because I have noticed, carrying on with the desirability and caste thing, I have noticed that some people are quite blatant, okay? They do want to match with somebody from a particular caste or community. So I have seen no Muslims on Grindr, which has really shocked me. But then the same side, there's also the fetishization because I've seen only Muslim men, please.
I would imagine that in today's time and atmosphere, they would be, in some ways similarly subjugated by their religion. So even if they want to play with it, it would be something which would be, made impossible by the existing power dynamics and structural inequality and so on. And I would say that desirability is such an interesting thing, because what has been considered desirable in India, I mean, look at Bollywood, look at, our actresses and so on. I mean, I really appreciate the older generation of actresses. So I'm like, in that sense, also against fashion, because
What's your
now we are
definition
showing.
of older? Please tell me.
My definition of older is Sushmita Sen, Raveena Tandon, but I know all the way back to like Rekha and even before and so on. So
Okay.
I know it through my grandfather, who researched a lot of Hindi songs.
Right.
So from the get go, from Balraj Sahani onwards
Wow.
and so on.
Okay.
So I am Bollywood literate.
Right. Right.
Let's be clear.
Yeah.
But I quite like the older generation of actresses such as Sushmita, Raveena, and so on. Even though they are in some ways considered, say for my generation, a lot of feminists of my generations, in some ways kind of like, oh, they didn't succeed. Like they weren't doing like female-centric films, and they weren't able to get the money, and they weren't able to get the right kind of husband, and that kind of, like very heteronormative way of describing their careers.
Right.
Please, those girls, when they were on screen, they were in drag. You could not tell whether it's a cis woman or a trans woman. And I love it. I love that their dresses were not completely like, edited for consumption. I love it that they were making these movements which would otherwise seem so funny work for them and at such different, difficult angles. I have huge respect for them. Like, this is drag.
Yeah,
And
I'm thinking actually even before Rekha and Khoon Bhari Mang in that song, the dance off song, like the outfits and the hair and the makeup, like you're right, it's high drag.
and desirability does change, but it is something which remains constantly rigid and within the confines of caste. So to just take it beyond appearance and to think of, like, there are also families in Bollywood. I don't want to use the word nepotism because that's also such a problem, that in the way that we use nepotism instead of caste. It's
Right.
bizarre because caste makes us accountable. So these little things that upper caste voices prop against kind of
Right.
each other, because their whole thing is routed in kind of, trying to take power within them, which is historical.
Right. Of course. Grace Banu, who is again a strong, influential political voice, Dalit queer activist from Tamil Nadu, software engineer as well, says it's doubly difficult for people from these communities, especially those who live in rural areas, to come out and assert their gender and sexual identity. Because in rural areas, you face physical violence, and there is so much bitterness amongst people for those who go against the status quo and gender norms, obviously. They continue saying that in that scenario of in person physical violence, online spaces become helpful and easy to access for Dalit queer people living in villages because of cheap internet. However, the larger population still doesn't know how to handle social media or even access the internet. There is that, again, crippling issue, which hence again there is exclusion that they do face because of a much bigger issue that's at play, right? So Banu concludes by saying in India, online spaces won't become queer and minority friendly unless offline and real spaces become brackets queer friendly.
I mean, it's so important. I mean, Grace is a friend, and it's so important that that division of like real versus virtual kind of. I mean, I do feel that they are very enmeshed, especially for queer people. They are very enmeshed. A lot of my long term relationship with queer people have been realized through the digital, and they are real relationships.
Right.
But I would say that that distinction between the real and virtual, and the visceral violence and kind of, is important, and is something which anybody who works with digital culture and, sort of digital spaces is constantly thinking about.
Yes.
I mean, more than half of India can't access internet, and
Exactly.
that's not only because of, oh, internet is cheap. I mean, like, there's the politics of how internet is provided in India also, and
Of
anybody who
course.
wants to on Google can. But right to internet is not a right which we have been able to ensure,
No.
even though livelihood is, made possible through internet now. Increasingly, governance is made possible through internet. Not only right to internet, and right to internet can work in many ways, right? Like, it can work in accessing public internet. It doesn't have to be private internet. It can work in the way of accessing public internet. Then comes the issue of autonomy. Like, there are a lot of times queer people who don't have personal devices to access internet from. So of course their family has it, don't have it. And these are very, very important issues, but unfortunately we don't find them on Pride Parchas, and we don't find them on Pride organizing,
I can't
or
wait to come to
outside Pride
Pride.
organizing,
Yeah.
on queer organizations and so
Yeah.
on. Like,
Right.
what are we doing now? Like, yeah.
So the recent Pride issue in Mumbai, there is actually history to that. There's history to the Dalit queers being silenced at Pride marches for quite a while. This happened first in Delhi in 2015, that magic year when all our lives changed, where Dhiren Borisa, Dhrubo Jyoti and Akhil Khan held placards saying Dalit, queer, proud. And when Dhrubo was asked by someone as to why they bring caste into everything, their reply was, we bring caste up because caste is everywhere and in my everything. Caste is in my shirt, caste is in my pant, caste is in my sex, caste is in my being, and caste is in every part of you too. Then again, I'm just giving context for listeners. Then again, in 2015 in Delhi, Jatin Pawar, a Dalit queer activist, held up a poster saying, no queer liberation without caste annihilation. And they were asked by the organizers to remove it because they didn't want any, in brackets, political party association. And unfortunately, in 2024, February, Mayura Savi and three other queer Dalits printed and held up posters of Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar and chanted Jai Jai Bhim, which is a call for caste solidarity. They were stopped by a member of the organizing community and chastised for making pride political. I mean, that's the biggest joke. If pride is not political, what the hell is it? Or maybe now, of course, the lens has changed. So, subsequently, the organizers did apologize, but I think the damage was done. So, what do you make of all this, Aro?
I mean, what to do? This is caste violence. This is caste violence 101. If Atrocities Act was actually implemented and if it was actually taken seriously, one could argue under some sections of it that this is something which is atrocious behavior. We wouldn't need the context of pride or whether pride is political or not,
Correct.
all of this debate
Correct.
to be able to deal with these cases because these are visceral cases. These are very clear cases where one is being targeted for because of their caste identity. And I think that I am a bit militant in that sense that I will have a good adversarial democratic debate with you
Right.
till the time your behavior with me is democratic. If it goes beyond democratic, which I think in this case it has, it's almost like, some kind of
Autocratic.
like half panchayat but pride edition, half panchayat but make it pride. And then literally pride committees sending queer community organizers to police, pride committees coming out with these wide guidelines that saying, don't do politics, kind of making it apolitical. So the old organizations and institutions and establishments don't dare push down caste in this way.
Right.
But it is the new ones which actually claimed some kind of marginality and we are marginalized and listen, we are not represented and we are not seen enough, kind of, which fears this kind of, it's literally fragile behavior, feeling like, oh, we will not be seen enough if this will be kind of seen.
Wow. That's a
Yeah,
very enlightening perspective.
I,
Thank you
I
for
feel I
that.
have responded even if I have not responded,
Right.
kind
No, I
of.
think that's a very enlightening way of looking at it. So, thank you for that. The online space has seen some improvement, some progress. I mean, your archive project, the Outcast LGBTQIA+, the Indian Queers Collective, the Blue Club. There are two queer texts. I've never done this in any of our podcast episodes, but I was quite fascinated by two queer texts, primarily because both relate to women, and we are constantly being told that even the queer space is dominated by cis gay men, correct? Cis gay privilege, correct? Male privilege, correct? So I thought it would be interesting to pick out two texts, one from film and one from literature. And I wanted to bring these to the audience and also get your opinion, not opinion, but just your thoughts on this. So the first is actually a good new friend, the super talented and very sensitive Neeraj Ghewan. His short film, Gili Puchi, which is part of Netflix's anthology called Ajeeb Dastan, which features a queer romance between a Dalit factory worker, Bharti, superbly played by the amazing Konkana Sen Sharma, and Priya, a conventionally attractive high caste woman played by the gorgeous Aditi Rao Haidar. Right? So, have you seen the short?
Of course I have.
Okay. So, just in a
Yeah.
nutshell for listeners, Bharti wants a job as a data operator. This is offered instead to Priya, despite her being underqualified. Both women are queer, but on different ends of their own acceptance. And they begin a kind of romance. I mean, like we have bromance. I don't know what's the term for two women. Is there a bromance ka equivalent?
Sapphic love.
Sapphic love. Good. You stopped me from saying romance, so which I'll get into a lot of trouble for.
Yes, I
Uh,
can give you 10 names of sapphic romances. That's
Okay,
fine.
Sapphic love, which is ultimately crushed when Bharti comes out as Dalit and Priya retreats. Right? There are lot more layers to the film. What was your take on the film, Aro?
This film is so exciting because for me, Bharti has gender non-conformance in
Yes,
my reading as a
yes, in her
trans.
appearance, yes.
Just like how jobs are gendered, like Aditi's character gets like, this job, which is like kind of a desk job, and Bharti gets like the factory. So, like, what is the sexuality of a factory worker? Are factory workers even allowed to have a sexual identity? And if they are allowed to have a sexual identity, can you even imagine a romance between them, like, say, for example, between Arjun Rampal and Chitrangada Sen in Inkar? In
Right.
a very office
Oof,
kind of
you're
setting.
really up on your bolly, huh?
I am very good
Yeah,
at it.
yeah. Wow, impressive.
point I wanted to do a podcast on Bollywood and queerness, but that's there's a pin in it based on my schedule and everything.
Right.
But I I just feel that that this is, I mean, also it's important because not only women but also just like lesbian stories are so few.
Right.
A lot of times when they are told, they are they are devoid of character. Then, like, this is something I hear from my lesbian friends across the world,
Right.
that lesbian film storytelling, when it's told on film, it's a lot of times told in the way that being lesbian then becomes the thing which drives the story and is about the story.
Right.
But this story avoids that kind of, common
Trope.
mistake in
Yes.
telling stories. Yeah. And I think because of that, it is stunning, and the Bharti's character is obviously stunning, and it's just so refreshing. I remember watching it and in some ways feeling that we have arrived. Like, even though I had not arrived and it wasn't like a trans lesbian romance, but that doesn't matter because that is the text. I mean, how are the older gays able to relate to Madhuri Dixit and Sridevi and so
Yeah.
on? Because
I want to
they're
do an
clearly.
episode on that actually, the
Yeah.
icons.
So I love this about like queer kind of representation. Our representation is not always literal and it's not always like who we are, but it's also what made us feel. And I think that's a deeper way of
Of
representation. I mean, of
connecting,
course, it
yes.
comes out of erasure and so on, but I think that's what the film did for me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was stunning. Okay, and lastly, and this is really blatant nepotism. But my own nanny, Ismat Chuktai, the writer, wrote a controversial queer short story, Le Half. Uh, I mean, A, are you familiar with any of this?
I'm completely familiar with this,
Yay.
and I've read Le Half, I have read Manto, I've written Ismat's contemporaries also, Faz, and so on. And the other history, which would be my nepotistic bit to it, is that my grandfather was part of the Progressive Writers Association movement, and then later went on to,
Are you
win his.
serious?
Yes, his name is Kanti Mohan Soos. He's commonly known by only first name because that was the fashion in communist parties, that you would only be known by their first name. So Comrade Kanti Mohan is also what he's known as.
Right.
And
Wow. So
I
you
think
really come from lefty stock, huh?
completely my whole family was left. My parents met in Students Federation of India.
Wow.
So they were both student leaders in SFI and they both met. And so I'm a third generation kind
Wear
of
it
like
proudly.
left
Yeah.
leaning person. Yeah, that
Yeah.
is something I'm confirming to.
So the short story depicts basically a neglected Nawab's wife who enters into a physical relationship with her maid, and this is told from a child's point of view, the writer, and based on real experience. So recently, there has been some interesting critical reading on into the story around its notions of caste respectability and desirability, and how the caste angle over the years actually has been erased by English translations. And until 7 8 years ago, I had only read English translations, various translations, and it's only now that I'm actually learning and reading and writing Urdu for the last 7 8 years that even I went back to the story when I saw those posts, because key caste related words like chamar, bhangan have been translated. Chamar became ugly woman, which again erases the caste. Bhangan became filthy wench in one of the example translations, right? So clearly the caste depiction gets erased, which is key, because this again, like Gili Pochi, is a romance in some ways, between a forbidden romance between women of differing castes. So there is that layer that's at play, as is in Neeraj's film, and there is the caste under this lehaf or quilt that we could well do to underscore it, because the Urdu text does it, the original, and despite years of all this sanitizing and wiping out. It is a story, it appears to be a story only of queer desire, when actually there is a lot of caste that's built into the story. And there is an unequal power dynamic. She is the, Nawab's wife. The other woman is a working class woman who gives her malish and who looks after her and who is like her maid, essentially. So a messier queerness actually would have led to a more incisive reading in some ways. So taking into account actually, and that was humbling and eye-opening for me, that actually caste is very central to the story. And I didn't really register that because of these words being hut out. Did you
Yeah.
see? Did you read that when you first read the story? Was that a predominant theme
I
for you?
I read it like that, like that's the difference between where we are placed in the society. I read it like that,
Humbling.
and I think in this piece it's so interesting that like as similar with actually Gilipucci, there's a commonality there, which is that there are two queer, like there are four queer characters in all. Let's put it like that. We don't know the queerness of the child in the Lehaf,
Right.
so that's not
Yes.
what we are gonna talk about right now. But the four adult kind of like queer characters, and two of them happen to be upper caste, and two of them happen to be uh, Dalits. Now they're all queer, but two of their queerness is being upheld by their status quo.
Right.
Aditi Rao Hegri gets the husband. She wants the husband. She
Right.
wants what comes with the safety of a husband,
Respectability. Yes.
of being born into that family and being married into another family. And same with the Begum, that even in the absence of the
The Nawab.
husband,
Yeah.
she has the feudal,
Structures.
property and structures to sustain her. Whereas for the other two to act on their desire can mean, there is this tricky thing, and some people criticize that Konkona was, given this kind of villainish twist of, like that she gets the job and she sabotages Aditi in some way, which I don't mind. I think queer people should be allowed to be
Yeah. To
villains.
be
I
to
think
have
we are
grayness.
villains irrespective. I might as well just gain some kind of mobility out of being villain, and not just be burned as witches for being
Yes.
villains.
At the
Like
stake.
yeah, like for example, all the Disney villains, were gay
Yeah.
if you look at them and so on. So I just love villainy. I think there's a case to be made for villainy. But the fact is that right up to that moment before she turns the tables on Aditi, because
Hmm.
that's something which runs through Ajib Dastans across the shots. She could have possibly faced precarity at her work because
Yes.
of this relationship and so
Absolutely.
on.
Yes.
And she's warned by it by the community elder who works with her also,
Correct.
that
Correct.
don't get into this. This can get messy. Uh, and it's the same kind of precarity of the maid. The maid is one of those people, as I said, like we go around the city, we either know people who are above us, or we know people who are horizontal to us. We know our classmates, our professors, and our bosses, but we don't know the people who clean for us in the offices. We don't know the people who pick up our garbage in the offices and so on, even though these are essential jobs and we need them uh,
True.
to sustain our society and to go about.
True.
So the names of people we know and the names of people we don't know has inherent power, and the names of people we want to ask and get to know also has inherent power. Uh, and I think it's so interesting that maid is replaceable. Bharti as a factory worker is disposable. So where is this queerness being realized? Is this actually queer? Because it raises questions of human dignity. And in both the texts, it's not clear that the upper caste queer partner or the upper caste queer end of that dynamic, of that relationship,
Right.
is willing to ensure or extend those protections, because it's not possible that they can't work together.
Of course.
Work is possible. I think this conversation is an example of this. But on what terms? And I think
Right.
those are very important and inherent questions
Need to be.
that are raised. And yeah, for me, it was very clear. Like I'm able to see caste not only in Lehaf, but also in Harry Potter, but also in Hunger Games, but also in Avatar, the Airbender, and so on. So
And in
like
Bollywood movies,
all the
closer home
time.
all the time.
I love Karan Johar, because like the thing is that Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum is so iconic, because Karan Johar is a master of creating these upper caste utopias,
Correct. Yeah.
And one might say, oh, there is no Dalit character, and that film is not about caste. But by
Right.
not being about caste, it is completely about caste,
Wow.
because it's showing that upper caste people can exist in
In
this
this
utopia,
bubble,
this
yeah.
cloud, and upper caste people can also constantly move, like their fantasy moves. They can be in Chandni Chowk, but think that their feudal haveli in Chandni Chowk
Switzerland. Yeah.
some England ka,
Yes.
castle and so on.
Yeah.
So that level they are dissociating on. It's
Right.
not even like disassociation on a normal level. It's on
Right.
an
On a
unbelievable level.
hyper, yeah, on a hyper. Wow.
And you need a dissociation when you sustain this kind of an inhuman world and society. You have to, when you can't look at what is, you have to look away and build something which distracts you. And so I love it. I love Karan Johar as a filmmaker.
Wow, interesting. Aru, we've reached the end of this very fascinating and very, very enlightening chat. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Genuinely, I think I have learned. I hope I go away and take some of this and learn to include it into my own work and into my own vocabulary. There is so much sensitivity and inclusivity that you have. You are burning this trail. I don't know whether you've realized that just in the setting up of the two projects that you have, just in terms of being who you are. Like you said, you push yourself to do the odd interview and to make even though there's nothing in it really for you, but I think it is important that you do that, and I am very excited to see where you go and what you do with all the knowledge and with all the power that you have. So please keep in touch. I've been stalking you on Insta for many years, so just follow me back, basically.
I will
Uh,
find you and follow you. I
yes,
didn't know this
and keep
until this point.
yeah, but so much love to you, and we have to pick up the conversation about our grandparents separately. Thank you very much for giving us your time, and
Anytime.
I hope and wish that when you do come to India, that I will be able to see you.
Yes, I think that can be a plan that we can make.
Yes.
And thanks for having me. I just, like as a closing remark, I would say that you talked about Blue Club, and I know Blue Club and Outcasts and so on are organizations which are always in need of funds.
Right.
There's always like a community of mutual aid that even Dalit Queer Project builds, and I think there is a fundraiser going on right now. I
Excellent.
think those are direct, important ways in which people can contribute. But I, as a person, absolutely, after all of what I've said and provided for free and out of generosity, I hate to be this person to explain to people then why they should, do direct reparations, why they should directly contribute. So if any of your listeners want to go
Yes.
there and contribute to these communities, that is one actual way of doing transformation, other than your own committing yourself to internal transformation and transforming
Sure.
your workspace
Sure.
and things like that,
Right.
which I think are all our
No,
responsibilities. And
thank you for being upfront about that. I think some people would shy away or feel awkward about that, but I think that is important. That is a step that everyone at the end of this podcast who feels a little moved or a little changed or their perspective has even been altered in a questioning way, please go ahead and contribute to these organizations because they do need funding, like you said. They do need actual on ground action aside from all the intellectual, metaphysical amazingness that we talk about. But thank you again, and I hope to see you in person soon.
yes, likewise.
All right,
Okay.
Aro, all the best. Lots of love. Bye bye.